Up our next guests. Talked at length, obviously, today about the future of beer and the high-end beer segment specifically, and kind of how we think that might develop over time. We heard about a whole new group of legal drinking age consumers that are about to enter the fray. We discussed retailing and merchandising and marketing and just how the entire environment is changing for beer. And we know that the way drinkers interacted with alcohol brands 10 years ago is incredibly different than the way that they interact with brands today, and will be different 10 years from now. One of the companies that is confronting some of the challenges and evolving alongside the alcohol industry is Constellation Brands. They're now the third largest beer company in the United States. They're also a multi-category supplier, competing in wine, spirits, as well as marijuana now. And most of you know that they purchased Ballast Point for $1 billion. Some of you may know that they purchased Florida's Funky Buddha Brewery earlier this year. And as a total beverage alcohol company, Constellation has access to some tremendous insights about the way consumers engage with brands across multiple segments. And so we're fortunate enough today to tap into some of those insights. And here to discuss their efforts to grow the high-end beer segment is Constellation Brands CMO Jim Sabia and Marty Birkel, the president of the company's Craft and Specialty Division. Guys, come on up. Cheers. Cheers. Appreciate it. We're the drizzly folks. I got my own delivery system. It's called the Birkel. Thanks, guys, for joining me. I appreciate it. We had some attendees that were surprised that Constellation was joining the Brewbound Session. I don't know what that says about me or about us, but we're really glad to have you here.
We're glad to be here.
I want to start with your guys' goal of being the leader in the high-end U.S. beer market. What does being a leader in the high-end beer segment mean to Constellation, and how do you guys measure your success towards accomplishing that goal?
I think that's a really good question. So we define the high end as any case of beer that is sold for over $25 to the consumer. And leadership to us obviously means being number one in terms of market share. We measure it every month. We look at IRI. The high-end growth is significant. It's all the growth in the beer category today. We have about a 27 share of that business combined. We're the number one supplier. And our goal, success looks like building on that leadership and participating in all parts of the high-end category.
Yeah. Where does Kraft fit into that mission? And I guess what is your company's growth strategy within the Kraft segment now?
Kraft's really important. Again, if you take a forward look, we believe over the next 3 years, the Kraft growth outlook, there's a bit of a shakeout going on. We all know that. But the growth in the segment's going to be in the mid-single digits. When you stack it up against all the other segments in beer, it'll provide the second greatest amount of growth behind Mexican imports. So it's an area we're really committed to and focused against. And our strategy is to, continue to build our presence in the category.
You guys recently shifted your acquisition strategy a bit. Can you speak to that? How you went from more of a national acquisition strategy to more of a regional and local strategy?
Sure, and it's really a reaction to the category. It's a dynamic category that's moving fast, and we believe we have a very strong national brand with Ballast Point. So we're going to use that as the centerpiece and kind of our national focus, and then we'll complement that with strong regional brewers such as Funky Buddha that we can kind of get a 1-2 punch of the category. Strong national and regional.
And I guess I want to take a step back from that and ask you guys, why did it take you so long to get into craft? And, why did you dive in the way you did with the purchase of a brewery for $1 billion?
I'll take it.
Yeah, you
just
should.
to start, Chris.
I'm going to have a beer.
We, if you remember, we were an importer.
Yep.
right, up until June of 2014. So we were an importer with Corona and Modelo, and then we were fortunate enough to purchase the brands in the States. So when we became a brewer, right, the DOJ gave us a amount of years where we had to supply our own product. So think about this, we're not brewers, we're importers, and now we have a brewery. So we're down in Nava, Mexico, trying to supply, the Corona and Modelos of the world, getting product from ABI for a period of time, but we had to expand the brewery. We had so much to do with our current import business that we had to get right. Because that's, as you know, as majority of our product, of our volume is in the import segment. So we had to get that right first. And then once we started getting that right, Marty and the team, we started looking at opportunities to get into the craft. Because you talk about the high end, and we believe it's all about premiumization. It's going to continue. We think in the next 10 years, it's going to be almost 500 million more cases in the high end. So that's all the growth is going to be coming from. So if the growth's coming from the high end, as Marty just mentioned, craft plays a very critical part of that. So we knew we needed to participate in that segment. So there's imports and there's craft, right? There's super domestic products, like Michelob Ultra plays in that space, right? 25 and above. So craft's a big part of it. ABA, we call, FMBs, ABA, that's another space that we have to get into. So it's a big part of what we believe is just going to happen to the beer category over the next 10 years.
Yeah. As a total segment, the high end, how big do you eventually see that getting? Products that are over $25 per case. How much of the total beer industry do you expect that to be, in 5 years, 10 years?
Well, naturally we don't have a crystal ball. However, if you look at what's happening with the premium lights, right, Bud Light, Miller Lite, Coors Light, and Budweiser, they're huge, right? They're 40% or so of the category, and they're declining. So there's a lot of volume coming out. So we believe it could be potentially 50% of the beer category moving forward.
Yeah. If you look at compare it to wine, I spent some time in the wine category. The wine category today, 75% of the sales are what they determine as premium, so above $7 a bottle. Today, we're about 40% in the high end. So there's a lot of upside within the beer category to continue to trade up, like Jim's discussing.
Yeah. I guess if you had to do it all over again with regards to the Ballast Point acquisition, and I guess knowing kind of how your craft strategy has evolved, you have the benefit of hindsight now, and just how the industry has evolved. Would you still have spent $1 billion for Ballast Point and entered the category in the way that you did?
Yes. I think Ballast Point, when we got into the business, there was a lot of learning that had to happen. I think the first thing I learned was Jack White did an amazing job building that company, building the culture, and building the brand. So we've got this amazing brand that we've got to build out and over time, make it a strong national player. That's why you saw things like the World Series commercial, because we're committed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we did some research, on Sculpin, right, on a national level, talking to craft beer drinkers. And we listed about 10 brands, and it's aided, right? So the consumer has a choice to say, have you ever heard of this brand? Once you go to the east and get outside of California with Sculpin, there's almost 80% of consumers that don't even know that Sculpin exists, right? So this is aided. This isn't like unaided. When you think about beer, what do you think about? No, this is aided. So we just look at the Ballast Point and Sculpin as we're committed, for the long term. It's a great, great brand. And, it's taught us so much about the craft segment. And I think it's helping us now as we talk, to the latest one, Funky Buddha, right? It's helping us collaborate with them and do more, into the space of craft.
How far along, speaking of Funky Buddha, how far along is that integration process right now?
It's coming along pretty nicely. Casey and Ryan, great people, making great beer. And we're following pretty much the model we did at Ballast Point, which was get in, learn about what makes the company unique, what makes it special, and then where can Constellation add value. And that's basically in the backroom functions and marketing. So we're progressing down that road. I think it came out today that we're going to expand the brand further into some southeast regional states. Kind of made that clear from the beginning. That was our strategy. And so we'll build it out and we'll see what happens and we'll work to create consumer demand so that we have a sustainable business moving forward.
Yeah, and I guess how does that expansion, that distribution expansion, fit within your sort of new strategy or your evolved strategy, I should say, of identifying regional brands and in many ways keeping them regional?
Yeah, I think we look at the distribution footprint. It's no secret we came out about 6 months ago and said, we want to begin to move our business into our gold network or the Modelo brand distributors for, the obvious reasons. You have a scale benefit, you have the ability to leverage off of each other. And when we started this process, we were in the mid-50s % of our business. Today we're at 75%, and we're working on a few more states. So we're mindful about the distributor size and footprint when we look at acquisitions and how it lines up with where we are.
Yeah. What's your appetite for M&A going forward?
Well, I'll just say, if you think about Constellation, right, it's really in our DNA. I don't know, people probably don't even know the history that well, but Constellation was founded in 1945 by Marvin Sands. We've had 3 CEOs, Marvin and his 2 sons. We're still family-owned, we're publicly traded, but they have the voting stock majority. And over that time period, we've done 30-something acquisitions. So DNA is really it's really a part of who we are, acquisitions. So you'll see more activity. It's just a question of when and how.
Will there be a 2-year period between each acquisition, you think, or will it pick up?
Hard to say. It just depends.
Yeah.
There are a lot of conversations. I think, as everyone knows in this room, there are a lot of conversations on a lot of levels going on today.
Yeah, I was going to say, how many phone calls are you guys getting these days?
A few, more than a few.
So I think, everyone knows how rapidly the craft segment is evolving and how much it's changed over the last decade or so. You guys, as you mentioned, have been in this business for a long time. You guys have seen a lot of change. And you guys have had to adapt to a lot of different changing consumer behaviors, a lot of different emerging business models. We're seeing tap rooms explode. We talked a lot today about the shift towards digital and mobile. So you guys have really kind of seen it all, lived through it all. Can you give us a glimpse of kind of the beer category of yesterday and how your experience helps shape what you think is to come?
You want to take that?
Yeah, I've been in this space for about almost 30 years. And it's one of these, we're very fortunate. I think everybody would concur who works in this industry that we're very fortunate to work in this industry. It's an incredible industry. It kind of hooks you and you can't let go of it. I think if you think back, it's always been hard. I'd be quite frank. Thinking back on the brands I've worked on, I started out with a distributor in New York back in 1987, went from distribution to sales in the last 20 years in marketing, and it's always been hard. It's always been competitive. You have ABI, very strong. You have Miller Coors. I think what's happening now is that when I started in craft back in 1995, it was like 1,000 or 1,500 breweries, and now there's close to 6,000.
Yeah.
So I think the amount of competition is very local. I think Marty's told me I'm learning a lot about the craft again. I've been out of it for 20 years, getting back into it. But in San Diego, there's 150, 160 local breweries. So it's extremely competitive. You go to shelf now and you see the assortments or all so much, which is wonderful. But it makes it more and more difficult from a competitive standpoint because what we do, whether it's Corona, Modelo, or Ballast Point, is how do you create consumer demand, right? As a marketer, that's what we have to do. And I think any brand, whether you're local or whether you're national, it's all about creating consumer demand. And the space is so competitive today that's where the difficulty is going to be, right? How do you differentiate your brand versus all the other brands? And I think one of the things that's happening too is retailers are starting to look at the long tail. Distributors are starting to say, well, how many different SKUs am I managing?
Yeah.
On the Modelo side of the business, we have like 150 SKUs, just 150. And we sell about 230, 40 million cases. So very, very, very efficient with our SKUs. And then, you know, a lot of the conversations we've had now is they're talking about, you know, all the crafts that they're bringing, all the SKUs they bring all the time, and it's getting to a point where the distributorships aren't as efficient as they need to be. So I think there's going to be a lot of pressure from distributors, from retailers, and even from consumers on, you know, how many different options and how many different brands are out there, and then which ones do I want?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the sort of million-dollar question is figuring out how to generate more consumer demand, particularly within craft, but I mean for beer in general. Marty, you've kind of been involved in a lot of facets of the business in your time with Constellation, including wine and spirits. From your perspective, what are some of those brands doing really well? And what are you guys learning from those other segments that you're then applying to beer?
I think that's good. Let me start at an industry level, because I spent a few years in the wine business and spirits business. I sat on the Distilled Spirits Council board for 10 years. And I think industry unity is important. And unity doesn't mean you agree on 100% of everything. You never will. But pick a number. There's 80 or 90% of the industry issues that we should be aligned on and we should be working together on. And I think that goes to things like educating consumers, creating demand, new occasions. And that's something that the other categories are doing much better than beer today. And as a result, beer is losing consumer occasions. So that's an opportunity that needs to be addressed, in my view. At a brand level, I think it's the basics, as has been mentioned all day long. It's know your consumers and know them really well and be really focused on them and create that emotional attachment with your brands. I think it's quality, easy thing to say, hard thing to execute. But I know in our case, for Sculpin, we do 300 quality checks on every batch. And you could say maybe that's too many. I don't know, but it's what we think we need to make sure that we get the quality done. And then it's relevancy and occasions, making sure that your brand stays relevant. And you balance, I think, consistency and approach with innovation and change. And that's more art than anything else.
You guys may do 300 quality checks, but I've read a couple Reddit posts that say Sculpin tastes different. So I think you guys changed it for sure. I mean, the people on Reddit definitely know.
Yeah. Why don't you go ask our brewers?
Yeah.
I think they'll tell you not a whole lot's changed except maybe a little bit more investment.
Yeah, I mean, and investment on the marketing side as well. We brought up the World Series ads earlier, and I mean, I think that's quite a story that really illustrates how nimble you guys can be as one of the larger organizations in the space. I'll leave this up to you, Marty. Maybe retell the story of just how a Sculpin ad came to be in the middle of the World Series.
It's very scientific.
Yeah, I call it Marty down the hallway. We built some videos. We made some videos for Sculpin that we aired this summer, on social media, really talking about, how wonderful a brand this is. We used brewers from Ballast Point, and we made these 15 and 6 seconds ads. We did one in Spanish, 3 in English, and we ran them on social media. So we had the film, right? So we had the film, and it's about 3 o'clock in Chicago, 7th game of the World Series, and we buy a lot of time with Fox, with our other brands. So our media agency and our media folks, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon said, hey, we have an opportunity in what they call floaters to buy time, with the World Series. And what happens, because if you watch some of the World Series, they were switching pitchers like every 2 batters. So, the networks don't know like how many pitching changes you're going to make, so they don't know how much time they have to sell. So what they do is they come to you and say, hey, look, would you want to purchase this spot? We can't guarantee you're going to be on, but if there are a lot of pitching changes, you may have an opportunity to air your spot. So we knew we had a Corona spot that we previously purchased. So we looked through our portfolio. We said we have to get Modelo. Modelo's growing, 18, 19%. Let's continue to grow that. Pacifico's another brand that we have a lot of energy for. And then I said to myself, and I talked to Greg Gallagher, and I said, hey, what if we ran Sculpin?
So I got a call.
And we kind of laughed at first. I mean, really? And then we called Hillary, and Marty down in San Diego, and we started going back and forth. We got the whole team together, and we said, well, what do you think? Well, maybe we should do it. And we made the decision, let's do it. And, look, I think that was a nice opportunity. I heard a lot from folks that, we have an IPA now advertised, in the World Series. And that was, I think that's great for the craft beer category, is that now in IPAs alongside, traditional lagers, and, the viewership of the World Series was, broke records, and especially in Houston and Los Angeles.
Yeah.
So it was a wonderful opportunity, and Marty supported it, and then we decided to run it, and you were with some of the brewers.
Yeah, so quick story. At 5 o'clock, we finally get the go-ahead that we're going to go, so I called Colby Chandler, who's our VP Specialty Brewer. He's been around forever. And he's out on his skateboard somewhere on the beach, and I call him, literally.
And he's the principal. He's the guy that did all the talking.
Yeah.
So I said, "Are you going to watch the World Series tonight?" He says, "No, dude, I wasn't planning on it." I said, "Well, I think you should, because you're going to be on it." So it happened pretty quick. And
made it to the World Series.
We're pleased with the results.
It's a little bit of a, shoot from the hip mentality there, it seems like.
I think, you think about our company, Constellation Brands, and you think about Corona. I mean, I always tell the story about our chairman, the guy named Bill Hackett. He introduced Corona, into America about 32 years ago with a 20-pack of glass. That was it. And, we have this kind of, we call it, founder's mentality, or this fighting spirit. And even being the third largest brewer, in America right now, we're very nimble. We're not big. We don't have a huge organization. We make decisions. We have the ability to make decisions. We don't have to go all the way up to Rob and the CEO to make decisions. So we were quick, and we knew that we had to make a decision quickly because Fox was telling us you in, you out. So we made a very quick decision. So it worked out well for us.
Yeah, and if you think about our filter of reason for being growth, how do we bring profitable growth? And that kind of frames up our decision-making process. You have to be nimble, especially in this category, or as was mentioned, you're going to miss a lot of the emerging trends.
Yeah, so the lesson really is, if you have a guiding principle for your brands, whether it's a guiding principle for every individual brand or the entire portfolio, you're able to make decisions like the one you did with the World Series.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the future for you guys. A lot of gray skies out there. Shipments are down about 2% on the year. We've seen years of double-digit growth within craft slow to about 5%. Now, this isn't for all brands, obviously. There are a lot of standout brands that are still, thriving and growing at, double-digit percentages. But for a lot of the more established, larger companies in the space, it's been a bit more of a challenge. Where do you guys think we're headed as a beer category, and what is Constellation doing to address the sort of category-wide volume loss issues?
I mean, our motto, Chris, is we control what we control, quite frankly. And, the industry is down to flat, right? But we're growing. We've grown now, for 30 consecutive quarters, our beer business. So we're real proud of that. And it just, we are focused on what we can do. Every month we do a lot of analytics to understand our business. We call it the drivers and drags. It's a regression model that tells us what's dragging our business and then what's driving our business. So we know that, when we take price, there's a little bit of a drag. We know that there's some cannibalization between Corona and Modelo, but we also know what's driving our business. And in our business and our brands, distribution and space and media and effectiveness of our ad are things that we control. Now, there are some external factors that we don't control. I mean, weather, it plays a role in beer naturally, right? So weather, the economic situations, unemployment, competitive activity, we don't worry too much about that because we can't control that. But the things that we can control, we get very, very focused on as an organization. The biggest push for us, with Ballast and all the other, brands that we have, is really getting our fair share of distribution. We're driving a lot of the growth, and we're pushing more and more for distribution and space. So that's what we focus on. And with Ballast Point, Marty and team are really focused on what we need to do. How do we build demand for him and his sales organization? So when they get it on shelf, right, it has the sales velocity, so it stays on shelf. Or when you get a handle, how do you maintain that handle, and how do you build demand? So we work very, very closely. One of the things that we do really well at Constellation is sales and marketing work very well together. That's not always, I'm not sure all organizations have that same, process that we have, but we plan together. We have a lot of debates. There's a lot of tension, right? You want sales and marketing to have tension because you don't want to go too far sales and too far marketing. Right. But we really control what we control, and we stay focused on that versus worrying about what the competition is doing. And we do a lot of research, as you can imagine, right? We do. We're fortunate enough to have the budgets to do the research, to understand about the consumer, about the trends, where is it going, what are we doing right, what are we doing wrong. So it's really.
So what are all the secrets? I mean, tell us.
I mean, it's
Folks
hard.
don't have the budget, so I want to know.
No, it's hard, all right? I mean, it's hard. I mean, for me, it's, I go from one day talking about Corona Modelo, to calling, Marty and Greg and Hillary talking about Ballast Point. It's like, the fundamentals of marketing are very similar, right? You have a brand architecture with, you got physical attributes, emotional attributes, to benefits, laddering up to a brand promise, and what we call a focus of sales. So as you develop that brand architecture, whether it's for Scopen or for Corona, it's the same process. Yeah. Now, the go-to-market strategy is naturally very, very different, right? How, what you do and what activities we do, how we work together, what are the priorities, that's very, very different.
Do you feel like Constellation is getting the space that it deserves at retail?
From an import side, no, we're not. I mean, we have out of stocks on Modelo Especial, like on Saturday afternoons in a lot of accounts. We know that. We do a lot of tracking against that. So, that's where we are working really closely with our national accounts team and our category management team to work with the bigger retailers and show them, look at the growth, where the growth is coming from. So we may need an incremental SKU on Corona or Modelo. Naturally with Ballast, as we go east, we're very cognizant of how much space do we need. We got to get it out there first. We got to make demand for it so there's velocity, and then we can ask more once we get that velocity.
And I think just to build on that, it's really what we've learned as the categories evolved is to narrow the focus a bit, right? So we have our brand architecture, which I won't bore you with all the details on that, but we have four SKUs that we're focused in driving our distribution and driving our activities around, whether it's on-premise placements, activation, off-premise feature and display. All of that really, as opposed to kind of a shotgun approach, we're going to more of a focused rifle approach. Yeah,
we talked about focusing on things that you can control. The retail shelf space seems like somewhere in the middle. It seems like something you don't have a whole lot of control over, but you can influence. Yeah. So how do you think about starting to control that, particularly as you look at some of the category captains, Anheuser-Busch, Molson Coors, and where does Constellation fit in, both with its import portfolio and its craft portfolio moving forward?
We want to talk about the national account, Julie Francis's team.
Yeah. So we just basically moved to a total beverage alcohol approach on our national accounts and category management. And in most instances, there's a separate wine and beer team involved in the big customers. And right now, we're mainly influencers, and we obviously want to follow all the government regulations and laws in terms of what you can and can't do. But we're becoming more important to the retailers, especially on the beer side, because of the momentum that Jim referenced. So we will continue to gain, I think, importance in that area of influencing what the shelf ultimately looks like.
So leveraging your other businesses to aid what you guys
through
are doing
insights.
Here.
Yeah, I mean, so we go to the retailers with category TBA insights, right, and share with them all the insights we know about beer drinkers and wine drinkers and spirit drinkers, so get them smarter about the consumers walking in our door. So that's kind of the total market, general market. But out west in California, there's a lot of Hispanic accounts where we are by far the largest, sellers. So we have a little more influence over there because we're such a big part of their business.
The largest brand now for Reyes out here in Southern California, correct?
Well, Modelo Especial is, I think it's the number one. Paul Verdu, you remember is number one in LA? Paul is like an old colleague of ours. Yeah. I think Modelo Especial, the latest IRI, 12 weeks, 26 weeks, Modelo Especial is actually the biggest beer brand in LA. And then Corona is the biggest beer brand in New York.
Wow.
Can I go back to the TBA approach? You might say, well, what kind of sense does that make? Well, the major retailers are interested in those insights. And we know one of them is that, 35% of the consumer base drinks across all three categories.
In the same night.
And it's over 50% of the total.
Part of that 35%, so yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, I have 2 daughters. Trust me, I see them drink across all categories all night. We're a good family. What can I say?
A TBA family.
Yeah, I like it. I want to stick for one more question on this. This sense that you got to focus on what you can control, and I think there are probably a lot of entrepreneurs in the room that can lose sight of that. That it is really important to not get distracted by things that you really have no control over. How do you guys take that mindset and allow everyone within the organization to kind of feed off of that and come to work every day and live it as well?
Well, for Kraft and Specialty, I'll say I think it starts with the culture. That was mentioned by the Ninkasi folks. And what we found is that every brand and company has a unique DNA, culture, personality. So it starts with maintaining that so people have a reason for going to work, they have their passion, they love it. And then it really begins with how can we focus our efforts, hold ourselves accountable for what we can control, as Jim mentioned, versus what we can't. And I think it's that balance of those two things. And then in our case, it's where can we leverage off of Constellation to add value.
Yeah, and I mean, it's really all about enabling everyone within the organization to think that way, right?
Right.
I think it's, Chris, this drivers and drags that we do on a monthly basis, we socialize that throughout the organization, right? So if you're working for Constellation, you know that distribution and space are critical, whether you're a marketer, whether you're a sales folk. The marketers have to develop tools and demand to drive more distribution and space, which then gives you pricing. So everybody truly understands what is driving this 30 consecutive quarters of growth. And, we're so focused against that because we know that's what's driving the business. So even from a marketing mix analysis, right, we put all of our activities, into a model. We understand what the return on investment is of these activities, whether it's above the line, TV, social, digital, retail promotions, sponsorships. And we can tell you, predictively, like if we spend $1, what's the ROI or what's the marginal ROI? So we all know that, and we socialize that throughout the organization. So when a field marketing person in somewhere wants to do A, B, C, or D, and they understand that, well, maybe that's not the best return on investment. Right, so they will say, okay, what is, right? And we talk about on-premise, and we talk about draft handles, how critically important those are. So everybody truly understands what's driving the business, right, and what activities we should be focused on. And we call each other out. I get, my team comes to me a lot with, well, why don't we do this sponsorships or that sponsorships? And we just go back to, well, what's the ROI? Is that a better dollar spent on that activity, or is a better dollar spent on this activity? Right, so the science part of it is really evolved, but I think to Marty's part about culture, and it's the art too, right? We have a lot of folks that have been in the category for a long time, a lot of veterans that know the category very well, so that's where the art comes in.
As Kraft becomes a bigger piece of what you guys do, does that change at all? It does seem like the more heavily invested you get into the Kraft segment, the more that determining where the dollars get spent, answering that question gets more difficult.
Well, we approach the Kraft segment different than the import segment. So then we look at, okay, the Kraft segment has X amount of dollars from a marketing perspective or a sales perspective. What are the foundational things we have to do? Right? It's not like Corona Modelo, but it's other basics, right? So you spend your resources on where you are in the life cycle of the brand and where the brand is.
Right. Part of focusing on what you can control is staying really engaged with the consumer. This has come up a number of times today. Started with it this morning, so feels like a great thing to return to at the end of the day is really focusing on the consumer needs and understanding them, staying engaged with them. Beyond what you guys are doing with the Ballast Point tap rooms, how is Constellation staying connected to Kraft consumers, and what insights have you gained as a result?
Well, I wouldn't discount the value of the tasting rooms and the benefit that we get out of them. I mean, we look constantly at our sales. We do a lot of consumer research in the tasting rooms to get information about consumer preferences on style, taste, purchase intent. And we also, do a lot of R&D brewing and run them through the taste room, so we get insights there. There's the syndicated database that the Ninkasi folks mentioned. There's a ton of data, maybe too much, but that's where we think Constellation adds a lot of value, helping us understand it. And then there's Jim's team and the insights that they have. So it's really, I think, a three-pronged approach for us to stay close to craft consumers. And then it's also, we get a lot of great input from our wholesalers and our big customers about, what are the emerging trends, what's working, what's not. Monday morning, I'll be in New York City at a wholesaler council meeting trying to get that information from their perspective so that we can incorporate it into the things we're doing.
Yeah. We also talked about innovation this morning, and Marty, you brought this up during one of our phone calls earlier this month, which is that brewing beers that you like to drink, or having brewers brew beers that they like to drink, isn't necessarily the best sort of strategy for product innovation or new product development at this point in time. And I think Ninkasi kind of touched on that as well. The way you articulated it was that you like to brew beers you're proud of and make sure consumers will like it. So can you help our audience understand what that looks like for your craft brands, for Ballast Point and for Funky Buddha? What's the secret to taking a brand from the innovation department, turning it into something that actually resonates with a more mainstream consumer set?
I think first it starts with the team you have in place, and I've got a really strong team, whether it's in Jim's area or in the Ballast Point area, that understand, the need to work collaboratively and quickly and rely on the insights and the facts, along with kind of the art aspect of it, to get to market as quickly as we can. We've all worked hard, you heard it today from a lot of people, to improve our chances of success when you come to market by leveraging insights, by talking with consumers, testing in the tasting room. We do all of that like everyone else. Three takeaways from today really are cans, right? Everybody's going into cans, more sessionable beers. But when you say that, I think you have to balance it against the fact that IPAs are still a third of the category and over 60% of the growth. So we look at all those factors in terms of how we bring innovation to market. Probably our latest example is Fathom. Fathom is a new IPA we came out with. It's a more sessionable, think of it as an entry-level IPA for us. From recipe development to market, it took us 5 months. Wow. And that was people busting it pretty hard, but we got it done and we got it to market.
And that hits on all 3 points. Cans, a little bit more sessionable and still capitalizing on IPA, which is a third.
Yeah, we've done some studies, Chris, that, it's called a turf study, that how many brands can you actually have from a brewer where you don't get, you eventually get diminishing returns. And it's not as many as you think. It's really between 4, 6, 7. And after that, you're really not getting consumers to come into your consideration set. So we just, as Marty mentioned about the focus on these brands and the Fathom and the Scopen and some of the other brands we have, we're really focused on the 5 or 6 or 7 of these brands that we know that we can get consumers, and how do we attract new consumers into the franchise. If you start doing, 10, 12, and 15, you're basically just cannibalizing yourself. That's what the study, we've seen it in past work.
Speaking of attracting new consumers, where do you see, just over the next 18 to 24 months, the craft category evolving, and how is that segment going to bring new consumers into craft?
World Series ads.
How about for the companies that can't afford that?
No. Well, we're trying to help, right? We're trying to really get high end. My perspective, I think this category is going to continue to grow. I think it's going to get harder, like we mentioned earlier, right? You have a lot of local, you have national, you have regional. So is it going to be more difficult? Yes. However, we really truly believe, that's why we're into this craft segment. It's going to be a driver of the beer category. In the next 10 years, we don't see. Craft is, what's the share now, around 12, right, or so?
Oh, sure, yeah.
We think it's going to continue to grow. We're very excited about the space. And it's been wonderful for beer. It's great what craft category has been able to do. And I think it's really helped, not losing more share of stomach to wine and spirits because they're so interesting. Right. Consumers that get excited about, these beers and what's coming, what's in the brew pubs and So we believe it's going to continue to grow, and it's going to be a big part of the high-end development.
Yeah, I think the fundamental question is, do you think trade up is going to continue in the beer category? And if you do, where are they going to go? And we believe that craft will provide probably the second biggest piece of growth in the category.
Yeah.
So
if it were not for craft, where would we be?
exactly. That's why we're happy to be in craft.
Yeah. Well, we got a few minutes for audience questions here. A couple that came in while we were chatting. The first, how far out does Constellation plan its marketing strategy, and how quickly can the ship be turned?
Yeah, we're about 12 months out. So right now in a world that myself and my team, we're making commercials, right? So now for Corona, Modelo, Pacifico, we're making all the ads that we're share with our distributors in March. And the minute we do that, we start the next year's plan like the week later. So we do take a step back, do a lot of consumer research, understand it. And we have a pretty well-defined calendar, right? We know, right? Cinco, Memorial Day, July 4th. So we lay out a calendar, and we interact with our sales leadership 3 times a year. And then we get out in front of our distributor network like October, November, and then we plan for the year. So we're planning, from a marketing perspective, we're about a year out. We develop all the retail promotions, all the advertising. And even from a distributor perspective, we're talking to them, September, October, November for the following year. Right, so we've been doing this now for about 8 years, and it's been really effective. And now Marty and his team are starting to do that too with the Gold Network distributors, talking about Ballast Point and Funky Buddha. Okay, which part of the calendar are we going to get focused behind? Where are we going to focus? Because these wholesalers, I think everybody knows this, right? They have monthly business objectives, and a lot of the wholesalers have between the folks that I've spoke with 7 to 10. So how do you get what they call an MBO? How do you get an MBO during a time period that's critically important to your brand, and then you get the entire organization focused against that time period? So we lay out the planning calendar, every year, way in advance. Now, can we turn things? Yes, of course we can, because we get incremental dollars along the way. We can buy more media, right? We buy in the upfront, but we can buy in the scatter market, so we can go in and just buy media if we have more resources. So we can move pretty quickly. Product development is from an import perspective a little more difficult, even for craft, when you start talking to national accounts, because in national accounts, for example, like Walmart, they want to know by June and July, and some of the big retailers of the previous year, what's your new innovation? So we have to be working on innovation 18 to 24 months prior, so we can tell some of our major retailers that, hey, we're going to come out with this brand and this SKU, next year. So it's a long lead time.
Unless some of those incremental dollars are being spent on investing in the marijuana space, right?
We're there to learn.
Yes.
In Canada.
Now, if Tony McGee was here, we could ask him, because he's the resident expert.
Yeah. I feel like you had an opportunity to ask Tony McGee a lot of things about marijuana at one point in time.
He's a very smart guy in a lot of areas.
Yeah. Well, with that, guys, I know we're just out of time.
Yes. Or Jamie's saying, that's enough, Marty.
Well, it's been a real pleasure having you guys here, and I hope we can do this again sometime.
Sure, thank you. Great to be here, Chris.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.